Ethan had always been on the edge of space, far from the bright stars and busy human settlements. He was stationed at an outpost that monitored signals, a job he never thought much about. It was lonely work, but it had its quiet comfort. His only company was the hum of the machinery and the endless stretch of space outside his window. He had seen all sorts of strange things through the year's strange signals, mysterious disappearances, but he had never been prepared for what came next. One evening, as Ethan went through his usual routine, something caught his attention. A strange signal was coming from a distant planet. The code was different, nothing like he had ever seen before. It wasn't like any distress signal from a ship. It had a pulse to it, almost like it was calling to him. He could feel a pull in his chest as he looked at the message. The signal was urgent. It was calling for help, but it didn't specify from whom. Curiosity got the best of him. Ethan sent out a report to his superiors, but he knew they would be slow to act. After all, the planet was uncharted, and there was no record of any intelligent life there. No one else seemed to care about the message, but to Ethan, it felt different. It felt personal. Without waiting for approval, Ethan decided to investigate. On his own, he boarded his shuttle and set a course for the unknown planet. As the ship descended, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be here, that somehow this was all part of his journey. He didn't know why, but he felt an undeniable connection to this world. When he finally landed, Ethan took a deep breath and stepped out of the shuttle. The air was thin, but breathable. The planet was a strange mix of lush greenery and dark forests, with tall trees that twisted into the sky like strange sculptures. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a reddish glow over the landscape. Ethan felt a sense of awe as he looked around, sensing that something important was waiting for him. He followed the faint signal deeper into the forest, unsure of what to expect. The path was difficult, the ground uneven, but he kept moving forward. Every now and then, he thought he heard something moving in the trees, but when he turned around, there was nothing there. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching him, guiding him. After what seemed like hours, Ethan finally saw something through the trees. It was a figure, an alien woman, standing perfectly still, as if she had been waiting for him. She was tall, her skin the color of polished stone, with intricate markings that ran across her arms. Her eyes were a brilliant shade of green, like the deepest forest, and they seemed to pierce straight into his soul. Ethan froze, unsure of what to do. He had encountered alien species before, but nothing like this. The woman didn't seem hostile, but there was a quiet power in the air around her. He hesitated, but then, as if drawn by some invisible force, he stepped closer. The woman's lips parted, and her voice was like a melody. "You came," she said, her voice soft but full of strength. "I knew you would." Ethan blinked, surprised. I don't know why I'm here. I just followed the signal." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "The signal was meant for you," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "You're the one I've been waiting for." Ethan felt a sudden warmth in his chest. There was something about her that felt familiar. It wasn't just her words, but the way she spoke, the way her presence seemed to fill the space around them. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like he had always known her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough with the questions that filled his mind. The woman stepped closer, her gaze still unwavering. "Hiding ever since, waiting for someone who could help me bring my people back." Ethan's mind raced. This was no ordinary encounter. This was something much bigger than a simple rescue mission. There was a story here, one that would change everything. But there was also a deep connection between them, something he couldn't explain. His heart pounded in his chest as Lyra stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "I don't know how I can help you," Ethan admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "But I'm here." Lyra's gaze softened. "You don't have to understand it all now, but your arrival means something. It means we're not alone anymore." For the first time since arriving on this strange world, Ethan felt a sense of purpose. Whatever had brought him here, it was more than just the signal. It was fate, and for some reason, it involved Lyra. She smiled, a small but knowing smile. I think we were made for each other." Ethan stood there, stunned. As the world around them seemed to fade away, all that mattered was her, and the feeling that they were bound together in a way that defied all logic. This was only the beginning of something far greater, something that would change both their lives and the galaxy forever. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Lyra after the strange encounter in the forest. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her eyes, her presence, it all felt so familiar, yet so foreign. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. He needed to stay and learn more. The following day, Lyra took Ethan deeper into her world, showing him the hidden city that her people had once called home. The ruins were beautiful in their own way, ancient stone buildings covered in thick vines and glowing plants. It was a place of mystery and forgotten history. The air was still, as if the very city itself was waiting for something. Ethan followed her, each step feeling like they were walking through time. "This was once the heart of my people's civilization," Lyra explained, her voice filled with both pride and sadness. "We were strong, powerful, and united. But then all changed when betrayal tore us apart." Ethan was quiet, absorbing the weight of her words. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like to witness the fall of a people so great. He glanced around at the decaying buildings, the remnants of a once thriving city. It felt empty, like a memory that had been forgotten. As they walked, Lyra began to tell him more about her people. She spoke of a race that had mastered the stars, built incredible technologies, and lived in harmony with the universe. But all of that came crashing down when a group of traitors from within their own ranks turned against them. These traitors had made alliances with other, more dangerous species, and in the end, they betrayed their own kind. The once immense empire fell, leaving only a few survivors scattered across the galaxy. Lyra was one of those survivors. "Why are you the last?" Ethan asked softly. He could see the pain in her eyes as she spoke of her lost people. "I'm the last because I was saved," she said. "I was hidden away as a child when the destruction began. I grew up in hiding, learning what remained of our history. But there are no others left. My people are gone." The weight of her words hit Ethan hard. He had never considered the idea of being the last of an entire race. The thought was overwhelming. He wondered how she could bear it. But despite everything, there was a strength in her, a quiet determination that made Ethan want to protect her, to help her find a way to rebuild what was lost. Lyra led him to a large structure in the center of the city, a building that seemed to have withstood the test of time better than the others. It was ancient, but the carvings on the walls still glowed faintly in the dim light of the planet's twin suns. "This is the Hall of Ancestors," Lyra said, her voice filled with reverence. "It holds the knowledge of my people, the history of everything we were. It is the key to understanding who we are and how we can rebuild." Ethan followed her inside, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The walls were covered in strange symbols, intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. Lyra touched one of the carvings, and a soft light flickered to life, revealing more details of the symbols. "These markings," she said, tracing them with her fingers, "are part of an ancient language. It was used to record everything: the rise of our people, our greatest achievements, and the betrayal that destroyed us." Ethan stepped closer, feeling drawn to the glowing symbols. As he watched Lyra, something strange began to happen. He could feel a connection, a pull toward the carvings. The symbols seemed to resonate with him, as if they were calling to him in a way that was hard to explain. His heart raced, and for a brief moment, he felt like he understood them. "You feel it too, don't you?" Lyra asked, noticing his reaction. "The connection, it's not just me. My people believe that certain individuals were destined to carry the legacy of our race forward. And I think you might be one of those people." Ethan was taken aback. "Me?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I don't understand. I'm just a soldier. Why would I be connected to all of this?" Lyra smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "You're more than just a soldier. I can feel it, Ethan. There's something about you, something in your soul that connects with mine, with my people's past. We were meant to meet." Her words were both comforting and unsettling. Ethan had never believed in destiny or fate, but standing in this ancient hall, with Lyra at his side, he couldn't deny the strange feeling that had been growing inside him since their first encounter. It was as though everything in the universe had led him to this moment. Together, Lyra said, "We can bring back what was lost. We can rebuild my people, restore what was taken from us." Ethan felt a heavy responsibility settle on his shoulders. He didn't know how he could help her. He was just a soldier, far from home, with no special abilities or knowledge. But looking into Lyra's eyes, he realized that he couldn't turn his back on her. There was something powerful between them, something that went beyond their differences. "I'll help you," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I don't know how, but I'll paint entire worlds." And now, Lyra was the last of them, the final hope for her people. The bond between them grew stronger each day. It wasn't just the mystery of her past or the mission to restore her people that drew Ethan in. It was her strength, her determination, and her unwavering belief that they were meant to be together. But deep down, Ethan feared that he wasn't enough. He was just one man, one soldier. What could he possibly do to help Lyra rebuild a civilization that had been destroyed? One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Lyra shared something that chilled Ethan to his core. "The ones who destroyed us are still out there," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "The ones who betray my people are not gone. They still exist, and they know I am alive." Ethan's heart sank. "Who are they? What do they want?" "They are a powerful race," Lyra replied, her gaze darkening. "They call themselves the Vorn. They are ruthless and cunning. They will stop at nothing to prevent my people from rising again. And now that I've survived, they will come for me." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had heard of the Vorn before, whispers of their cruelty, their conquest across the galaxy. They were a race of warriors, known for their merciless tactics and their obsession with control. Lyra's people had stood in their way once, and now, the Vorn would do anything to ensure that they stayed buried forever. "They'll come for me," Lyra repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "And when they do, they will destroy everything I've built here." Ethan stood up, his fists clenched. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "You can't fight them alone. They are too strong. We need more allies, more forces, more power than we have right now." Ethan's mind raced. He knew Lyra was right. They couldn't face the Vorn on their own. They needed help from the humans, help from anyone who could stand against the Vorn. But how could they convince others to help? The galaxy was vast, and humanity had its own problems to deal with. The last thing the human fleet would want was to get involved in a war with an unknown enemy, especially one as dangerous as the Vorn. "We'll find a way," Ethan said, determination in his voice. "We'll reach out. We'll warn the galaxy. Get people on our side." Lyra stood up beside him, her expression serious. "I hope you're right. But time is running out. The Vorn will be here soon, and we need to be ready." For the next few days, they worked tirelessly, using Lyra's ancient technology to send out messages to distant star systems. They contacted human colonies, other alien races that might have heard of the Vorn, anyone who could lend a hand. The messages were clear. A deadly enemy was coming, and if they didn't unite, the galaxy would fall. As the days passed, Ethan couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight, to survive. But this was different. This wasn't just a battle for territory or resources. This was a fight for the survival of an entire species and for Lyra's future. One night, as they sat in the shadows of the city ruins, Lyra turned to Ethan, her eyes searching his face. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked at her, his heart heavy. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I won't stop until we find out." Lyra smiled faintly, her hand brushing against his. "I trust you, Ethan. I've never trusted anyone more." Her words sent a rush of warmth through him, but it also made the weight of their situation feel even heavier. They weren't just fighting for her people anymore. They were fighting for something much more personal. They were fighting for each The next morning, they received a reply. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them a glimmer of hope. A group of rebels, operating far on the outer rim of human space, had agreed to meet with them. They had heard of the Vorn and were willing to help at least. That's what their message implied. Ethan and Lyra prepared to meet them, traveling through the thick forests and across the harsh terrain to reach the rebel stronghold. Every step felt like they were moving closer to something they couldn't escape. The tension between them was palpable, and yet it only seemed to bring them closer. As they arrived at the rebel base, they were greeted by a small group of fighters, humans, aliens, and others who had been forced into hiding because of the Vorn's ruthless tactics. They were ragtag, worn, and ready for a fight. Lyra, the leader of the rebels, a tall, gruff human named Seth, greeted them. "We've heard your message. We've been preparing for something like this." Lyra nodded, grateful but cautious. "Thank you for answering our call." Seth glanced at Ethan. "You're the soldier who helped her, right? You're going to need more than just courage to take down the Vorn." Ethan didn't flinch. "We'll have more than that," Seth smiled, a glint of respect in his eyes. "We'll see about that." As Ethan and Lyra prepared to join forces with the rebels, the looming threat of the Vorn felt closer than ever. The fight for survival had only just begun. Ethan felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him with each passing hour. The rebel base, hidden in the dense forests of the outer rim, had become their new home, at least for the time being. The alliance with the rebels was fragile, but it was the only hope they had. Lyra had explained everything to their new allies: the fall of her people, the Vorn's destructive power, and the desperate need for support. The rebels listened carefully, their faces a mix of disbelief and determination. For the next few days, the group prepared for the coming war. They trained, strategized, and strengthened their defenses. Lyra and Ethan worked tirelessly to gather information, but the clock was ticking. The Vorn were getting closer, and with each passing moment, the odds seemed to grow even more impossible. Ethan spent most of his time working with Seth, the leader of the rebel group, planning out how they could fight the Vorn. Seth was a tough, battle-hardened soldier who had seen more than his fair share of conflict. He was skeptical about Lyra's claims at first, but after seeing her knowledge and the power she held, he began to trust her. And Ethan of factions that were hesitant to fight them head-on. Still, the rebel leader was determined to make this work. They couldn't face the Vorn alone. Late one night, as Ethan and Lyra made their way back to their quarters, Lyra stopped suddenly. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. The air had suddenly grown thick with tension. "I can feel something. Something's not right," Lyra said, her voice low and urgent. Before Ethan could react, a loud crash echoed through the camp. The sound of blaster fire rang out from the northern perimeter. Seth's voice came over the comms, sharp with panic. "We've been compromised. Get to the defense stations now." Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward the nearest cover. "Stay close," he ordered. The camp was in chaos. Rebels scrambled to their posts, weapons in hand, as a group of unknown attackers rushed through the camp's outer defenses. The enemy had breached their walls, and the sound of gunfire filled the night air. Ethan and Lyra rushed to help, but as they rounded a corner, they were met by a shocking sight. Seth stood with a group of rebels, but there was something off about his demeanor. He was surrounded by a group of armed strangers, Vorn soldiers. They had infiltrated the camp, and now Seth was standing with them, his hands raised in surrender. "Betrayal," Lyra whispered, her voice full of disbelief. Ethan felt his heart drop. "Seth, no." Seth's eyes met Ethan's, but there was no recognition in them. His face was cold, as if he had made a decision that had severed any connection between them. The rebel leader had sold them out. "You should have known, Ethan," Seth said, his voice flat. "I've been working with the Vorn all along. The rebel cause was never going to win. This is the only way to survive." Ethan couldn't believe it. The leader of the rebels, the man who had welcomed them into his fold, had been a traitor from the start. The Vorn had already infiltrated the camp through Seth's betrayal, and now they had control. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the situation. Why? She asked. Why help the Vorn? They destroy my people. Seth's eyes flickered for a moment, a hint of regret crossing his face. Survival, Lyra. The Vorn promised us power resources control. The galaxy is full of wars, and there's no place for people like us unless we bow to the strongest. I made my choice. Ethan felt a surge of anger. You betrayed everyone here, people who trusted you. Seth shrugged, uncaring. Trust is a luxury in a galaxy like this. Just as the Vorn soldiers raised their weapons, a loud explosion ripped through the air, shaking the ground beneath them. Rebel fighters, who had been waiting for the signal, launched a surprise counterattack. From the east, chaos erupted as gunfire rang out once more, and the traitors found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. Move, Ethan shouted, grabbing Lyra by the arm and pulling her into the fray. With blasters drawn, they fought their way through the camp, but the situation was quickly turning against them. Seth and the Vorn had the upper hand, and it seemed like there was no escape. But Lyra wasn't ready to give up yet. As they found a brief moment of cover, Lyra's eyes narrowed with determination. Ethan, I can do this. I can stop them. But you have to trust me. Ethan hesitated, but there was no time to argue. He knew that Lyra was capable of things beyond what he could understand, and in that moment, he placed his trust in her completely. Do it, he said, his voice steady. Lyra raised her hands, her eyes glowing faintly as she called upon the power of her ancestors. A shockwave of energy erupted from her, sending the Vorn soldiers flying backward. The rebels who had been pinned down took advantage of the opening, pushing forward with renewed strength. The battle was far from over, but Lyra had given them a fighting chance. As the smoke cleared and the rebels regrouped, Seth and the Vorn retreated. But Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. The Vorn were relentless, and Seth's betrayal was just another obstacle in their path. Lyra looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with both pain and determination. We have to keep going. We can't stop now. Ethan nodded, his resolve firm. We won't. The fight was far from over. But Ethan knew one thing for sure. They would face the future together, no matter what it took. They would stop the Vorn, rebuild what was lost, and protect each other. This was their fight now. The camp had been shaken to its core by the betrayal of Seth. The rebels, once hopeful, now found themselves reeling from the loss of their leader and the surprise attack by the Vorn. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of urgency in the air. Time was running out, and the Vorn wouldn't wait for them to regroup. Ethan couldn't shake the image of Seth standing there, a traitor to the very cause he had once claimed to fight for. The rebel leader had sold out everyone, and now the Vorn were closer than ever. But Lyra's power had given them a fighting chance, and Ethan wasn't about to let that go to waste. We need to move, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. The Vorn won't be far behind. Ethan nodded, his gaze hardening. He had never imagined it would come to this. What had started as a mission to help Lyra and her people now felt like a battle for their very survival. But the war had just begun, and they needed to get ahead of the Vorn. If they stayed here, they were sitting ducks. The rebel fighters were shaken, but they had no choice but to press on. Ethan and Lyra gathered the remaining forces and began to make plans to move to a safer location. They couldn't stay in the rebel camp any longer. The Vorn knew where they were, and it was only a matter of time before they came to finish what they started. We've got a supply depot to the east, Seth had mentioned in his final betrayal. It's our best shot at surviving. Despite the bitter feeling of betrayal, Ethan knew Seth had given them a lead, and that was all they had left. A new plan had to form around that. Let's move out, Ethan said, gathering the few remaining rebels who hadn't been captured or lost. He looked to Lyra, who had already started to scan the horizon. The determination in her eyes reminded him of what they were fighting for. The group began to move quickly, traveling through the thick forest that surrounded their camp. Lyra led the way, her sharp senses guiding them through the dense trees and underbrush. Ethan kept his eyes peeled, watching for any signs of movement that might indicate they were being followed. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now. The journey was difficult, the terrain was rough, and the rebels were exhausted from the previous night's battle. They had no real food or water, and the thought of escaping the Vorn felt more like an impossible dream with each passing hour. But there was something in the air, something that pushed them forward. It was hope. It was the idea that, despite everything they had lost, they still had a chance. As the hours passed, the group made their way toward the supply depot, a heavily fortified location that the rebels had kept hidden from the enemy. Lyra, however, was starting to show signs of strain. The use of her powers had taken a toll on her, and Ethan could see the exhaustion on her face. But there was no stopping her. She wouldn't give up. Not now. Ethan couldn't help but admire her strength. She had faced so much loss, so much pain, yet here she was, pushing forward with the same determination she had shown since they met. In many ways, she was the reason they had survived this long. She had given them hope when they had none, and now it was his turn to give that hope back. As they approached the supply depot, Lyra stopped abruptly. She motioned for everyone to crouch down and stay silent. Ethan followed her gaze and saw what she had sensed before he did. A group of Vorn soldiers moving through the area, searching for any sign of life. "We have to be careful," Lyra whispered. "If they find us now, it's over." Ethan's mind raced. The depot was only a short distance away, but it was heavily guarded. If they tried to rush it, they risked walking straight into a trap. They needed a distraction. "I can cause a diversion," Lyra said, as if reading his thoughts. She was already preparing herself to use her powers once more. "But I'll need time to focus. It will only give us a few minutes." Ethan glanced at her, then at the rebels. He had to make a choice. "All right, do it. We'll cover you." The moment Lyra closed her eyes, a faint glow surrounded her, and the air seemed to shift. She was drawing on her energy, preparing to unleash her full strength. Ethan watched her, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know how much longer she could keep this up, but he trusted her. She was their key to survival. The Vorn soldiers were getting closer, but Ethan held his ground. He would not let them fall now, not after everything they had fought for. The explosion that followed Lyra's concentrated burst of power rocked the forest. The Vorn soldiers were thrown off their feet, and the rebels seized their chance. In the chaos, Ethan and the others ran toward the supply depot, their hearts pounding in their chests. Lyra's powers were incredible, but they didn't come without a cost. By the time they reached the safety of the depot, she was barely able to stand. Her face was pale, and sweat dotted her forehead. "We made it," Ethan said, his voice low as he helped her inside. "You did it, Lyra." She smiled weakly, though it was clear the toll had been high. "We're not safe yet, but we're one step closer." The depot was heavily fortified, but it wasn't indestructible. Lyra collapsed into a chair, exhausted from her effort, but her eyes remained sharp. "We need to prepare," she said softly. "The Vorn will come after us. They'll stop at nothing." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. He had no illusions about what lay ahead. This wasn't over. But for the first time in days, he felt a sense of hope. They had made it to safety barely, and now they would make their stand. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "We'll fight," she said simply, "together." Ethan squeezed her hand, his heart filled with a new sense of determination. This fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for a future for Lyra, for her people, and for the galaxy. And no matter what it took, he would fight beside her. The supply depot was quiet for the first time in hours. The sudden chaos of the Vorn attack had left the air thick with tension. But now, as the rebels regrouped, there was a sense of uneasy calm. They had escaped the initial onslaught, but Lyra knew it was only a matter of time before the Vorn came. For them again, Ethan stood at the edge of the depot, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could feel the weight of the situation on his shoulders, the knowledge that everything rested on their next move. The Vorn were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they wiped out everyone who stood in their way. He turned back to look at Lyra. She was sitting on a crate, her hands resting in her lap, her face pale from the strain of using her powers. But despite her exhaustion, Her eyes still shone with determination. "We need to plan," she said, her voice steady. "Though tired, we can't wait here forever. If we don't strike back, the Vorn will destroy everything we've fought for." Ethan nodded. "Stepping closer. What do you suggest?" Lyra's gaze flickered to the map spread out in front of them. The rebels had gathered what little information they could on the Vorn's movements, but it was still incomplete. "The Vorn were always one step ahead. We know they'll come for us soon," Lyra said, her fingers tracing a route on the map. "But there's an old outpost and ancient structure that the Vorn don't know about. If we can get there, we can launch an attack against them, take them by surprise." Ethan frowned. "It sounds risky. How do we know they won't be waiting for us?" Lyra's expression softened. "We don't, but we have no choice. The longer we stay here, the stronger they become. If we don't act now, they'll destroy the last remnants of my people." Ethan understood. Lyra's pain was something he couldn't fully grasp, but he felt it. She was fighting not just for her survival, but for the future of her entire species, and he would stand by her no matter the odds. "We'll do it," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We'll go to the outpost." The rebels gathered quickly, their faces set with determination. They knew the risks, but there was no turning back. For some, this was their last chance. For others, it was the beginning of a new fight for survival. As they moved out, the group traveled through the dense forests, staying low to avoid detection. Lyra led the way, her sharp senses guiding them through the terrain. Ethan kept his eyes on the horizon, ever watchful for any sign of the Vorn. They reached the outpost just before nightfall. The ancient structure stood tall and silent, a relic of a time long past. It was hidden deep in the forest, its presence forgotten by most, but Lyra knew the secrets it held. She had come here once before, as a child, and now it was their last hope. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "We'll use the outpost to launch our attack. It has everything we need: weaponry, communications, a way to fight back." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening around his blaster. He could feel the tension in the air. The Vorn were close, and the time for hesitation was over. They had to strike first. As the rebels moved into position, Lyra activated the outpost systems. The old machines hummed to life, their once dormant power now fully awakened. The rebel fighters gathered around her, watching as she worked. "We've got one shot at this," Lyra said, her voice sharp with focus. "Once the Vorn know where we are, it's over." Ethan glanced at the rebels. They were nervous, but they trusted Lyra. They trusted him. "We'll make it work," he said. "We've come this far. We can't back down now." The comms crackled to life, and the voice of one of the rebels came through. "Ethan, we've spotted Vorn ships approaching. They're coming in fast." Ethan's heart raced. "Everyone, get into position." "Lyra, are we ready?" Lyra nodded, her hands steady. Despite the urgency of the situation, "We're ready." The rebels spread out, taking their positions around the outpost. Ethan stayed close to Lyra, watching as she prepared the final systems. The Vorn were close to close, but they would not be caught off guard again. As the first Vorn ship descended through the thick forest canopy, Lyra raised her hands, channeling the power of her ancestors. The air around her shimmered with energy as she focused on the task at hand. "Now," she shouted. A massive blast erupted from the outpost, striking the Vorn ship mid-flight. The ship was torn apart in a fiery explosion, and the sky was filled with debris. Ethan could see the shock on the Vorn's faces as they scrambled to regroup. The rebels moved quickly, firing at the disoriented Vorn soldiers as they landed. The battle had begun. Ethan fought alongside Lyra, moving with precision, his every move calculated. The rebels were holding their own, but the Vorn were relentless. For every soldier they took down, two more seemed to appear. Lyra's powers surged through the battlefield, her energy lighting up the night sky. She was a force of nature, an unstoppable presence, and with each blast, the Vorn were pushed back. But even Lyra's incredible strength had its limits. She was exhausted, her energy beginning to wane. Ethan could see the toll it was taking on her, but she wouldn't stop. "Not now. We need to end this," Ethan said, his voice urgent. Lyra nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the Vorn ship that hovered above them. The ship was the key. They had to destroy it, or the Vorn would keep coming. With a final burst of energy, Lyra released a powerful wave that sent the ship plummeting to the ground. The explosion that followed shook the earth beneath their feet. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice filled with awe. But even as they celebrated their victory, Lyra's strength began to fade. She collapsed to the ground, her breath shallow. "Lyra," Ethan shouted, rushing to her side. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice weak. "We've won. But there's more to do." Ethan looked around at the battlefield. The Vorn were retreating, but they weren't gone. The fight was far from over, and there was still much to be done. But for now, they had a moment of victory. As he helped Lyra to her feet, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy had been shaken, but it had not yet been changed, and together, he and Lyra would fight until the very end. The battlefield had quieted, but the air still crackled with the tension of the fight. Ethan stood beside Lyra, watching the smoke rise from the remains of the Vorn ship. They had won today, at least. The rebels had held their ground, and the Vorn had been pushed back. But there was no time to relax. The battle was far from over, and Ethan knew the Vorn wouldn't stop until they were wiped out completely. Lyra was exhausted, her strength nearly drained from the immense power she had used. Her pale face showed the toll of their victory, but her eyes were still filled with the same fire that had kept her going all this time. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice a mixture of relief and concern. "But there's still more to be done." Lyra nodded, her breath shallow. "We've made a dent, but it's not enough. The Vorn will return with greater numbers. We need to strike them where it hurts, take their command center down. That's the only way we can end this for good." Ethan's heart pounded. He knew Lyra was right. The Vorn wouldn't stop. They had been relentless so far, and if they didn't finish what they started, the galaxy would be at their mercy. But Ethan also knew they couldn't do it alone. "We'll need more help," Ethan said, glancing around at the tired faces of the rebels. They had fought bravely, but they were outnumbered, and the Vorn had resources they couldn't match. "We can't take on the Vorn command center without backup." Lyra's gaze turned to the horizon, her mind racing. "I know a place where we can find allies," she said, her voice gaining strength. "There's an old alliance of races that once stood with my people. They've been in hiding for years, but they might still be able to help." Ethan looked at her, hopeful but cautious. "Where are they? How do we find them?" Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes filled with determination. "I've had contact with them before, but they'll need proof that the Vorn are a real threat. They're cautious, and they've stayed hidden for too long to risk coming out without being sure." Ethan understood. They needed to make a case that the Vorn weren't just a problem for Lyra's people. They were a threat to everyone in the galaxy. If they wanted the Alliance to stand with them, they needed to show that the Vorn wouldn't stop until every species was under their control. "We'll show them," Ethan said firmly. "We'll make them believe. We'll take the fight to the Vorn and prove that we're not backing down." The rebel fighters began to gather their wounded, and the group quickly fell into action. There was no time to waste. They had made it this far, and now they had a chance to end the war before it spread any further. Lyra stood tall despite her exhaustion, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "We'll need to move quickly. The Vorn will be regrouping, and we have to make sure they know we're coming. This time, we take the fight to their home." Ethan's pulse quickened. He had never imagined they would be able to make such a bold move, but with Lyra by his side, anything seemed possible. Her determination had become his own, and together, they could make a difference. As they made their way to the rebels' transport, Lyra leaned in close to Ethan. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Ethan smiled, but the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on his shoulders. "We're in this together, Lyra. You've given me a reason to fight, a reason to keep going." She smiled back, a soft but knowing smile. It wasn't just the fight that had brought them together, it was something more. They had both found something in each other that went beyond the battle. They had found strength, hope, and in a strange way, Love died as they set course for the Hidden Alliance. Ethan's mind raced with the possibilities. This was their chance to stop the Vorn once and for all. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rebuilding Lyra's people and rebuilding the galaxy they had lost. The days ahead would be filled with challenges. The Alliance wouldn't be easy to convince, and the Vorn would fight harder than ever. But Ethan was ready. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As the ship sped through the stars, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. And in that moment, as he looked over at Lyra, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. She had given him a reason to fight, a reason to hope, and he would do whatever it took to protect her, to protect the future they were building, for the first time in a long time. Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.